What's up, everyone? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Bucks and Locked On Pretzels, as you can see from Frank Madden, late night snack. That's fair enough. But we're Crispix. We're talking, not a sponsor of the podcast. We are talking about Greece and Serbia today. It was a classic, but if you're a Greek fan or a Giannis fan, not necessarily the result you wanted, but you still got to saw a monster performance from Giannis. So we're going to break that down. And I heard a whisper that Frank has some takes that he wants to get off his chest. So please stick around to the end of the podcast. It will be worth your time. I can promise you that. Let's get started.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show daily and also find my work over at ESPN alongside me, the founder of brewhoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. And of course, we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen or first watch of every day. And you know, I keep saying this, but the numbers through the offseason, the dead of the offseason, have still been pretty damn strong, Frank. And I think the Greek national team is a big part of that. Today's game was a World Cup qualifier. Very early start for me. Middle of the day for our friends in the US. And you said the exact record here. I was reading. It looked like there was a record crowd for a European World Cup qualifier. Now, that's a pretty niche record bracket we're looking at there, but 19,000 plus were at this game. Went to overtime. Jokic versus Giannis. The atmosphere at this game was as good as we thought it would be. It would be just a fun game to go to, Frank. Let's get that out of the way first.
Yeah, a lot of the commentary, especially from our friend Harris Stavru and others that were in the building, was that it was just crazy, super loud, really intense. I'll have to take their word for it because the FIBA Courtside Live, Courtside 1891 app that I was using, which I paid like $35 for.
Don't get me started on
total
that.
Garbage. Total garbage.
Goodness.
Illegal streams have never looked so good.
Oh.
I had a really hard time getting the damn thing to work on a computer. And then I was like, well, why am I doing this? I was watching it on my daughter's iPad because I was trying to do some work and stuff, and could not get it to maximize so I could see it more than a small thing. And then the volume was off. And then I realized there was you could keep scrolling down and see the buttons. And if you touch the screen at all, instead of bringing up a menu, it just pauses it immediately. It's just God, why is this so hard? And then I downloaded the app and literally kept pushing watch live for all these games, and it never would open it was just terrible. League Pass, we always give League Pass a bunch of crap because League Pass has just lagged behind, especially the MLB TV app. But man, it was like FIBA is trying to make the NBA look good in terms of apps. But anyway, I was still able to watch the game in spite of all that. I soldiered through all that adversity. And yeah, I mean, I would say this game absolutely lived up to the billing that, a lot of people had been talking about for the past week or so. Let's just say late August, not exactly the time when we get to typically see a lot of marquee basketball, but Giannis and Jokic actually having to defend each other probably more than you normally would expect, especially given that Kostas Antetokounmpo picked up a knee injury and missed certainly most of the second half. And, that meant Giannis sort of had to deal with Jokic's considerable bulk. And, Giannis just not big enough for Jokic at times. But, I mean, Giannis, we need to just read off the stat line here. I mean, we talk about historic, nights. Yes, the huge crowd, but Giannis, 40 points on 14 and 25 shooting. I think he was 2 out of 7 from 3, 7 out of 10 from the foul line, 14 to 25 from the field. 8 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 or 3 steals, I think. And in 40 minutes too, which is hard to do given that FIBA games are only 40 minutes long. Obviously, the overtime extended the runway. I believe, there were some tweets about it. I was looking back at his game log. I think the Mavericks loss at home last year was the only game in the regular season where he played 40 minutes, and it was like barely 40 minutes. So this was a very uncommon workload for Giannis. He hit 40 a bunch of times in the playoffs, but obviously, especially given some of the kind of injury wobbles that he had with the knee in the back last, week or two, let's just say I was not hoping for a 40-minute Giannis game today. And you just hope that, again, he gets kind of as much rest. And, with the ramp up here is probably the biggest thing you worry about, just the fact that he hasn't obviously played in a few months. And now he's being asked to kind of immediately jump in and play heavy minute loads. Fingers crossed, seemed to get through this game fine. And, apparently a FIBA qualifying record point total from Giannis as well, which just underscores what we talked about last week, which is that, for a guy that has really never found kind of his best basketball at the international level in FIBA competition. You mentioned 14.8 points per game in the last World Cup in 2019. Very disappointing performance for Giannis. He's been just dominant in all 3 games that he's played now, 2 friendlies, and now this game, which obviously was very high stakes, especially for Serbia, given Greece was, I believe, at the top of the group coming into the game, and Serbia was only 1-3 in this qualifying. So, this was a must-win game for Serbia at home. And, for a style of play in FIBA that we always talk about how it doesn't really tend to favor a guy like Giannis. His team, Greece, doesn't really have great shooting around him. Didn't matter. It didn't matter. He was kind of his dominant self. And I thought the most interesting, he was out in transition a ton. He's got a good pick and roll understanding, especially with Nick Kalathis, who certainly has some limitations, again, especially as a shooter, but knows how to play off of Giannis and pick and roll. And his decision-making was really good. Had some couple nice dishes to Kostas for dunks. So always fun to see him hooking up with his brothers on the floor and getting to, experience, again, just what must be just an incredible experience, just him and his brothers representing their country after all that they went through as kids to be here now at the highest level must be awesome. But overall, again, job one, get Giannis through these games healthy. I'm hoping we don't see a lot of / any more Giannis 40-minute games. But that's kind of just the reality of these types of situations. This is you're the Bucks are the older brother who's got the Ferrari. This is the summer weekend where you hand the keys to the younger brother and say, hey, yeah, you want to borrow my car for a couple weeks? Well, guess what? They're not going to baby that car. They're going to go crazy and put it through its paces. And obviously Greece, they're not. They obviously, I'm sure the Greek national team wants to get Giannis through these games healthy, but they also have, let's just say, slightly different motivations. They're trying to win these games now, and they're not worried about next year's playoffs and things like that. So again, it's always a difficult trade-off, and I don't blame Bucks fans, especially if you're not Greek, for having a little bit of mixed emotions. But again, I think the headline today is just Giannis once again just looking like the best player in the world, and in a game where Nikola Jokic also reiterated why he's an MVP of the NBA as well. He was great, and the two of them kind of going at it down the stretch was fun to watch. Both guys hit some big shots, and again, a loss isn't ideal, but a pretty great performance on the road in about as hostile environment as you can find.
Yeah, as you mentioned, this game clearly just purely looking at the standings in the group for the World Cup meant a lot more to Serbia than it did Greece. And I will say, I don't think you're going to make any friends, Frank, with our Greek contingent, just based on what I read in the YouTube comments. But in your defense, Frank, I'm going into bat for you. So the other day when we discussed Giannis and the back and the knee, there was a strong sentiment I can gather from our Greek friends that was, he's fine. They're just resting him. There's nothing wrong with him. There's nothing to worry about. What I would say is, do not use the fact that Giannis played 40 minutes today and had 40 points as some sort of evidence that he's fine. Because let's just say there is a lot of evidence to suggest that this man can play through whatever the hell he needs to get the job done. And I think a matchup against Nikola Jokic, he was going to play, and he was never going to take himself off the floor if he saw, that's for sure. That's just not in his makeup. That's why we love him. So, yeah, I think long term, again, this is just not something he's put his body through in the middle of August. Is it preferable? No. Did I think that it was incredibly fun to watch? Absolutely. And it was like the contrast between Jokic and his old man game and Giannis's power and speed. The last 4 MVPs have gone to these two guys. I thought it was awesome. I would have liked it if Greece could have got the win. One point I'll make, towards the end of overtime, we saw Tyler Dorsey, who actually hit a couple of important shots throughout the game, hit the 3 to tie it up. The game went to overtime, kicked his leg out, was looking for the foul. In FIBA, you got to be very careful. The officials are looking for any excuse to penalize players for those types of things. So he was probably a little bit fortunate there, but the game went to overtime, as we said, and Serbia got the win. I want to ask you about Kostas, though. You mentioned that he had a knee concern, didn't play for much of the second half. But first, we'll talk about betonline.net, our sponsors of the podcast, and big news today. Chet Holmgren, out for the season. The Liz Frank, the dreaded Liz Frank foot injury, I would say. Pretty common injury here in Australia with footy players. I think NFL, there's been a number of guys that have had this, but it's not really great news, particularly for a 7-footer. So he's out, obviously, at the Rookie of the Year race. But how did it shape the odds? Paolo Banchero, obviously the favorite. Keegan Murray, second. What about Marjon Beauchamp? The last time these odds came out, so around draft night, Marjon Beauchamp was 66-1. Right now, he's 100-1. 100-1. Marjon Beauchamp, do you like those odds? Are they juicy to you? Well, you can go and have a look at betonline.net. There's also NFL odds there and MLB as well, if you think the Brewers have got a run in them. Well, I admire your optimism, but you can check out the odds at betonline.net. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, now that I'm done pissing off our Wisconsin sports fans, Frank, with my Milwaukee Brewers jokes, and I love the Milwaukee Brewers, to be clear, I want to ask you about Kostas. So this is interesting. So Thanasis had some moments in this game, actually knocked down a couple of threes, had a couple of putbacks.
We should know one of those threes came from the corner about 8 seconds after he shot a corner three that went off the side of the backboard. So
and he gave it to the crowd. He did give it to the crowd.
I mean, I guess, shout out to Thanasis, and he's not afraid, right? Shooter's got to shoot. Well, so does Thanasis. Like to take that second shot after, missing that first one so badly, like that takes some chutzpah. And, shout out to Thanasis. Always fun to see the Antetokounmpos doing their thing, and Kostas in particular he's looked really good. And hopefully that whatever the injury is, I haven't seen an update on the injury, but obviously I don't think any of us Greek fans, Bucks fans, anybody wants to see Giannis having to play center for the entirety of Eurobasket. So again, hopefully Kostas comes back soon, and they've got a few days off here before for the next qualifier.
Well, Thanasis also hit a 3 late in the fourth quarter just to keep Greece alive, and they were able to push it to overtime. So he had some moments, there's no doubt. The thing that's stood out to me, so I'm not gonna lie about it. I haven't watched a lot of Kostas play. I just haven't. I certainly haven't been following him play in France. Wasn't watching him play with the East Bay, West Bay, North Bay Lakers, or whatever they call it. I don't know what they're called, but I wasn't watching him there. So, look, he's only 24, turns 25 in November. The thing that's, I don't know, snuck up on me is just how big this guy is. I mean, he is, like, height-wise, I mean, he's massive. Now, clearly, I think there was some moments tonight, particularly defensively. He was able to be scored on relatively easy, particularly on those sort of deep catches in the paint, which is not necessarily his fault. But where his age is, and based on the fact that, let's be honest, it's not going to surprise anyone if he ends up on the Bucks roster at one point or time. Do you see, he genuinely does stuff for this Greek team, and is a pretty important player, particularly with Papa Giannis, not Papa Pittman, Papa Giannis, not in the lineup currently. Do you see anything with Kostas? Because I know it's the name, and that's why you get a little excited, but it's intriguing, and you get excited when you see Giannis throwing these lobs to Kostas.
You're just trying to get me in trouble with Greek fans. Is that what you're trying to do?
Well, I'm just asking for some basic optimism here, Frank. But you do what you need to do on a Thursday night.
I mean, the interesting thing is, I'd be curious if you like kind of measured Giannis and Kostas back to back, because Kostas looks like he might be a little taller than Giannis
Yeah.
at this point. He's not as just sort of physically strong, but he does feel a little bit more like a more traditional center. You know, again, part of that I think is just because we're used to seeing Giannis. We know he doesn't love to bang in the post against 7 foot, 270-pound, two-time MVPs like Nikola Jokic, but who does? So I think part of it is just because maybe Costas feels more like a true center just because of what he can't do. Obviously, he doesn't have any of Giannis's kind of ball skill, but he's become a really good, I think rim runner and just a guy whose explosiveness around the basket he's figured out how to put to good use. I don't know how many dunks he has in the past couple weeks worth of friendlies, but the physical tool set is definitely there. And I think you could definitely make an argument like, as a player, would the Bucks be better off having Kostas than Thanasis? Well, you definitely make that argument. I think the skill level required to be an NBA, third string center or whatever it is, end of bench center type, is obviously not that high. If you're really tall, you can block some shots and you can rim run and finish around the basket, which Costas can do, then obviously that's that gets you at least in the game. And again, was he on the Lakers in part because of his last name? I'm sure that was a big part of it. But could he play in the NBA at some point as a guy kind of a down the bench type guy? Like, sure. Like, I think he has the requisite athleticism and size to do that. And I think the interesting question is, for the role of being in that position, someone like Thanasis, a lot of his job is to basically be a pain in the ass in practices, to be a cheerleader on the bench, and when he does get kind of random chances to play, like kind of bring energy and sort of change up the game's tempo a little bit, which is different than asking him to be, which of these guys would be a better starter at the NBA level, right? I think Costas may very well be better suited to being, a kind of deep rotation center than Thanasis as a, slightly undersized four-man or something like that. But as far as a guy actually on your team playing a role in the locker room, etc., Costas doesn't give me exactly the same Thanasis energy, Thanasis vibes. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I believe Costas is a free agent. I do not expect him to get the 15th roster spot, although if he did, I would just probably laugh because, I mean, why not at this point, right? We've got the whole Antetokounmpo family on payroll, and hey, might as well at this point, right? They got a big house in River Hills. Might as well just bring them all home and have them all living together and commuting together to Bucks games. But shout out to Costas. I think he's gotten definitely better probably since we saw him in the NBA when didn't really feel like he was close to being an NBA player. But he's done well for himself, and he's still in that age range where probably the door has not been entirely slammed shut on his potential NBA future, especially given his last name and the fact that he's probably going to get the benefit of the doubt in ways that if your name was Kane Papa Pittman, you probably wouldn't get the benefit of the doubt.
5 years younger than Thanasis as well. So is there more room for improvement? I guess we'll see over the next period here. So Greece will play Belgium in the next World Cup qualifier in a couple of days' time. They've only lost the one game in qualifying, but after this next game against Belgium, there is 4 more games. The next window's in November. The following window's in February. So just as a little bit of a news flash here, you're not going to have Giannis in those games. So I am curious, ahead of the Eurobasket, which is going to be a packed schedule, does Giannis play in this game? I'm tipping that Greece would really, really want him to play, lock up this win, and then they're in a really, really strong position for the World Cup next year. So I unless there's some real health concerns, I think that Giannis would want to play, and I think Greece would really want him to play. So we'll see what happens there. You did DM me and mention Kevin Durant, Frank. The biggest topic of conversation in the NBA this offseason, what do you got to say for yourself?
Wow. I mean, do we need one more basketball podcaster with a Kevin Durant opinion? Probably not. Probably not.
We do. If it's you, yes.
I will say this, just I'll just give my Kevin Durant take through the lens mainly of, sort of the Bucks viewpoint, right? Bucks fans.
Yep.
I am okay with him trying to reconcile with the Nets. I think when it all started, and I think, we both sort of made similar points about, hey, if Kevin Durant can get shipped out to Phoenix and the Nets sort of, downshift into, kind of a play-in type team, maybe they have better longer term odds, but the Nets sort of deconstruct the weirdness of the KD kind of Kyrie era. Hey, that's fine. Let's just get rid of that level of talent, especially KD from the East, and move on. But once Phoenix effectively got ruled out with the Ayton signing, or really even before that, when it seemed like Brooklyn just didn't really want DeAndre Ayton. Doesn't seem like anybody wants DeAndre Ayton. Maybe that'll make DeAndre Ayton happy when he realizes that the only people that really want DeAndre Ayton are the Phoenix Suns.
Can't be DeAndre Hayton.
By the way, I still find it so weird how like nobody was talking about DeAndre Ayton being pissed off until like basically they were, getting killed in that game 7. It seemed like he pretty much like did fine all of last season. And then all of a sudden in like the last part of the playoffs there, he's having problems with Monty Williams, who's like, everybody's favorite human being and everything. So I don't know, just a weird situation that I don't know. If I would say I feel like the Suns have been dinged a little bit too much, as far as like kind of preseason hype. It feels like people have sort of taken them out of like the top tier of the West in some cases, which maybe I don't think everybody has, but I don't know. I feel like I'm higher on the Suns next year than a lot of people. But we'll see. But I think really when it started being talked about more, like, oh, Boston is the front runner for KD, or maybe Toronto makes a run at KD. That's when I, again, viewing this through my Bucks colored lenses, started to think, I don't, hey, KD could be a massively destabilizing figure for either of those franchises that kind of mortgages their future to an extent. I don't know if that's a home run move for either of those teams if they're having to give up, for instance, obviously Jaylen Brown plus, Marcus Smart plus something, or maybe it's just Jaylen Brown and Derek White and a first round pick, right? But some version of that. I don't think it's, necessarily like, oh, just give the Celtics the Larry O'Brien trophy or anything like that, because I think we know enough at this point. Handing out trophies in the summer just doesn't make sense. We know that the season's too long and so many things can change. But that said, I think him staying in Brooklyn probably is for the best at this point for, I would say, other East teams that are not Boston and Toronto. Just because I don't know. I think the Nets have a really nice roster, but first off, just because he's staying there now, I don't think guarantees anything in terms of the rest of this season. Is KD? I'd be curious. I don't know if you've got the odds on Kevin Durant being on the Brooklyn Nets past the trade deadline this year, but I don't know if it's a coin flip. But I would say I'm not, completely sold that everything now is great and those guys are all gonna, be happy moving forward, because they just always seem to find reasons to not be happy and for things to be chaotic. So Brooklyn feels like it's going to be, a roller coaster ride no matter what happens. I do think it's funny that they got knocked out of all those national TV games because of all this. That's funny. I'm sure the networks will be scrambling to try to get them on at least early in the season when Durant is definitely still there. But I think net, I think probably a good thing for the Bucks that KD stays in Brooklyn. Again, that's one more team that should be good next year. But again, with all the uncertainty about that, with just the weird mix of characters they have, as Camille was saying, the Nets definitely don't frighten me. I think the Celtics are the only team. I wouldn't say they frighten me, but they're the only team that I if I had my choice, I would not want to play in the playoffs if I didn't have to. If I was the Bucks, and again, it's fun to look at. It's funny to look at it because Bucks had a 3-2 lead in that series and really blew a chance to win that even without Chris Middleton. But by the same token, I thought Boston just looked like the better team for a long stretch of that series as well, and Bucks obviously just sort of ran out of gas by Game 7. So, in so many ways, I feel like the rest of the East is just sort of window dressing. To me, Boston is sort of the clear team that the Bucks should have in their sights as kind of the team that they're going to have to go through. And when from a team construction standpoint, I think they're the again kind of the lens you apply in terms of thinking about it is, how do you build a roster that can beat the Boston Celtics? That's kind of, again, the first way that I would be looking at my roster construction. And the good news is I think you do have a roster that can beat the Boston Celtics. So I don't want to make it seem like, oh, they're screwed, they've got to go make a big move or something like that. But I don't know. I'm just really looking forward to the season. Should be a very, very, very interesting Eastern Conference. And again, just kind of fun to see the Eastern Conference actually be really good. And, which has been a relatively new thing for us, given the way the East has been for certainly much of my fandom. Basically the post-Bulls Eastern Conference is not exactly, scared too many folks, at least coming out of the West. But we'll see. So KD, that's fine that you're happy for now. I enjoy his tweets where he's dragging people. But KD also just kind of a weird guy. And man, it's going to be very interesting. I'm sure many of his interactions with Steve Nash are going to be closely monitored in game this year, just given the history of basically him getting hired because of KD and Kyrie, now seemingly KD trying to run him out of town, and apparently for the moment, them reaching some sort of peace agreement. So I don't know, never a dull moment, but hopefully the other piece, hopefully Jaylen Brown is feeling very underappreciated in Boston. Hopefully him getting dragged through the trade rumors, again, not like it's a insult to be, used as a centerpiece of hypothetical Kevin Durant trade rumors, but I don't know, hopefully he's feeling a little unloved, a little underappreciated. And I think Boston is interesting just because adding Brogdon, the group of guys they have, really talented, but they also don't have, kind of that Giannis tier 1 type superstar as good as Tatum was for most of last year. And I don't know, it's interesting, right? Throw Malcolm Brogdon in the mix. You got Jaylen Brown. How's he going to be feeling this year? Jason Tatum, he obviously feels like he's the top dog. It's just an interesting mix of personalities, let's say. And I don't know. You can't really take anything for granted. I think the Bucks are maybe the only team that I trust from a personality standpoint will be stable. And, especially when you compare them to Philly with Harden and Embiid and Harden's history, you compare them to even Miami. I mean, Jimmy is as good as Spo is, as stabilizing as Spo is. Jimmy's just so weird. You just never know with Jimmy. And obviously we know with KD and we'll see with Boston now as well. Depth, I'm not saying depth is a bad thing, but a lot of mouths to feed, especially with Brogdon there now. And Ime Udoka has an enviable job, but he also has may have a little bit of challenging job at times, sort of keeping everybody happy. And we'll see. Hopefully that works out in the Bucks' favor at some point.
And is Kevin Durant actually happy, or is it just
No.
too close to training camp, or is it just too close to training camp and they all realized, well, you're gonna have to come back, so we better say that everything's fine, and we'll see. So we'll see what plays out there. To your point you made, the Nets are now third favorite in the East, behind the Bucks and Celtics. They weren't there, so they've definitely come in. So people believe, if he's around, rightly so, that this will be a better team. But we shall wait and see. And one final point, you mentioned Camille saying she's not scared of anyone. Well, we had some pushback to that, but in Camille's defense, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think the point is that it's not like there's a KD, Steph Curry, Warriors in the East. Like, I don't think there's not a team that you should be going to sleep or not being able to sleep at night because of. Yeah, there's a bunch of good teams, but the Bucks have the best player in the world, so I don't think there's anyone you should be terrified of at this point in the season. We'll see what happens.
I mean, there's only one team that basically has won a championship in the East, right?
That's
with all due respect to Toronto, the Toronto team that won in 2019,
yes.
that was not the Toronto team that we have now, right? That was a Kawhi team.
Yeah.
They basically immediately broke up, and we haven't seen that team since. So, basically it's the Bucks. The Bucks are the only team in the East that has proven they can win a championship. And Cleveland, no, this ain't the LeBron James Cleveland Cavaliers that beat the 73 win Warriors. The Heat have not won a championship. Good job, good effort, getting close in the bubble. Boston obviously fell short. So at the end of the day, I mean, that's one huge thing that the Bucks have in their favor. They're the only team currently standing in the East that has done this. And again, I think as much as I talked about the other day, I worry about maybe a little. Are they in danger of maybe getting a little bit stale? Could they use maybe a little bit of difference, a little bit of different energy? We'll see if your guy Joe Ingles can deliver that once he finally gets back on the court. But it's not a bad place to be. Giannis Antetokounmpo that we saw again today. Just having that guy on your team is the best advantage you can have. You can't start with anything better than putting him on the floor first. So yeah, it's exciting. We get to watch hopefully another couple weeks of him injury free, and then he gets a few weeks off, and then we get real NBA basketball. Wow. Preseason real NBA basketball starting October 1st. And let's just say we often try to warn people, like don't buy tickets on the second night of a back-to-back expecting to see Giannis on the road or something like that. October 1st, I would say don't hold your breath that you're going to see Giannis suiting up in the first preseason game. We talked about how he's probably has to play in those 2 games in Abu Dhabi, but we'll see. Hopefully Giannis can continue to play at a high level, continue to look ready to dominate as he has. Now even FIBA can't hold him down, apparently, based on the past couple of weeks. So hopefully that continues, and hopefully his health continues to trend in the right direction, and we get to watch some basketball while we wait for Bucks basketball.
Absolutely. Check out the Locked On NBA podcast as well. And as we can see there, Frank has a Luka Vildoza shirt.
I was gonna say it's a Bucks and 6 shirt, but I just like the fact I still think of it as sort of like having an Eric Bledsoe jersey. That's sort of how I think about it. Shout out to Eric Bledsoe. Rest in peace. Rest his NBA career in peace.
Goodness gracious. Jeez. Still alive, we hope. We love that man. But wearing the number 6, you're able to stand up to the pressure of this podcast, Frankie boy. And for that, we are proud. All right. As I said, check out the Locked On NBA podcast. And you'll find out everything that's going on around the NBA. There was all the World Cup qualifiers, so a bunch of guys playing overnight. So you can catch up on everything that's going on there. As we mentioned, Greece and Belgium in a game that is, carries some importance for Team Greece. So we'll be able to keep an eye on that one. Shout out to Courtside 1891 and all the best. Trying to catch that stream there. And we will speak to you guys after the weekend.